Hello and welcome to this episode of Star Wars Universe Podcast. We're coming to you a little bit late. I have just spent 5 days in the desert, and so my throat needed a little time to recover. Paul lives in the desert full time, but doesn't actually interact with the world, so maybe it's not the same. But anyway, me and Paul are here to talk to you about Andor, Episode 9. A lot of questions come up, a lot of great character work, and it just continues to be a great series for diving into questions. So we're going to now have some ads. I don't control them, and I can't tell you how many ads there are going to be exactly in this episode, but I can promise you no more than 12. Welcome back. I'm Matthew, your host. I'm joined as always by Paul, my not host. Paul, how are we doing?
Perpetually parched here in the desert. But
yep.
Aside from that, doing pretty well. Yeah. Except I've been pondering, how many episodes are there in each season of Andor?
No more than 12.
Yeah, I think it's never more than 12, but...
Yeah.
I feel like we should cut that back. Anyway.
Look, it would not be... It is so very on brand for me to take one of the most, epic moments of an episode or a movie, use it in a fairly well thought out, although sometimes not, transition as a reference to it, but get the exact wording wrong. I mean, that is my brand 100%.
That's fair. Also, I would say that is very Star Wars.
Yes,
given the number of times people have said, Luke, I am your father, even though it doesn't say Luke.
Play it again, Sam. Never said in the movie.
Exactly.
So what'd you think of Andor 9?
I felt like if this episode weren't absolutely brilliant, it would have been unwatchable. Mm-hmm. But it was. And so it wasn't. We had both mentioned that we did not want to see another whole episode where they were just in the prison. Mm-hmm. But it worked partially.
It worked so well.
Almost entirely. Exactly, because they were not just in the prison, right? It's like this show just manages to have so much going on without much going on in terms of what happened? What did we actually see happen on screen? Some people building some things and then someone having a stroke. That was the action, and the lights flickered. That was what happened, right, in the episode. But what happened that we didn't see, and what happened in terms of character development was so much deeper.
I mean, we were talking a while ago about how there's already this incredible, in some ways I'd call it an ensemble cast, because you have so many characters who are so rich. All of the actors are nailing their parts so well. Because they take Andy Serkis, this well-known actor. He's been Gollum. He's been a lot of great things. And almost kind of MCU style, it appears at first like he's just going to have this cameo role of where basically he's just kind of part of the scenery, and that he is used to establish not only how awful the prison is, but that as these systems are so good at doing, it takes one of the victims of the oppression and makes him into an oppressor. And makes him sort of the primary face of how awful the prison is. I was like, okay, cool. That was a fun episode for him. He'll probably get killed in the escape. Cool. Now we're 9 episodes in, and he only had a 2-episode character arc. But I think it's one of my favorite character arcs in Star Wars. It was so well done and so subtly done, but just him getting to see, him coming to be aware of, it isn't as good, even though they've given you all this power. You're still a slave. You're still in prison. And just them showing how he changes with just that one last line that gave me chills. It was man, the show is good.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are a lot of characters that we only see a little bit of and can get somewhat of a sense of, but that are there's more going on there. And I wouldn't say that my initial impression of Kino was that he it was basically yours, but I wouldn't say plot furniture, I just I just don't feel like that's a thing really in this show.
Yeah.
And
as close as the show comes to it. But yes, I hear what you're saying.
yeah, I just, but like, I felt like in the first episode he was in, episode 8, it was, this was a character that we saw as, a tool of the establishment while also a victim of the establishment, right? And
exactly.
And that in this episode, I don't think it's just that he changes, right? Because I think there's two things that happen. One, in that last scene, it is revealed to us that he's always been motivated by, number one, getting out of there, right? Surviving and getting out of there. And number two, helping his dudes survive and get out of there, right? That is something that actually matters to him. That's not something that suddenly became important to him. That's always what he's wanted, right? He's always actually cared on some level about all those people that he's being, cruel to, but he's that sort of like drill sergeant who's hard on you because he doesn't want you to go off and get killed, right?
I think that I hadn't really put it into those words, but that is such a good point. And in some ways, it's even more like it would be worse. In some ways, it'd be easier to write him as a character who, and I think you see this in a lot of prison movies or TV shows, who's kind of happy to be a tool of the establishment because he wants the power and the comfort and all that kind of stuff. But you're right. For him, it's not just that. Like, maybe there's some of that, but it's also, like you said, he wants to be, look, if I'm hard on you, at least then you never have to have everybody else be hard on you. And if I'm hard on you, I'm going to keep as few of us getting hit by the light up floors and stuff like that than any way else.
Exactly. And he has, to this point, had this hope of getting out. And then once that hope is taken away, then it's like, well, what am I even doing? And then he's just like, never more than 12. It's like he's just all of a sudden going from this like very clear mission of, I'm going to stay alive. I'm going to keep my, people alive. And we're going to get out of here when we get out of here, to, all right, well, now it's on us to get out of here. Let's go.
Yeah. And I think the point you made at first actually comes in true even more there, because I think once you understand that, you can understand that part of his like refusal to talk to Andor about it, or Kreef as he thinks of him, Keef, is wanting to protect him. He's like, dude, we can get out of here if we play by the rules. And I think in some ways it's the fact that like not only does he see his friend die, but he sees just how little they care for him, that he's kind of like, why am I trying to help keep people safe if when they do get sick, this is what happens to them? If our lives are so meaningless in here, we might as well try to escape. Like, I think he's pretty certain that they're all going to die if they try to escape. Like, I don't think he's got some huge hope. But yeah, I think he's just like, why in the world am I trying to protect Andor and keep him in this place?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily that he's pretty certain that they're all going to die, but I think he realistically understands that the probability is high for each of them to die, right? I mean, it's like there's not a ton of hope of escape, but at the same time, I think he is sort of like, well, yeah, maybe Andor is right. They don't care at all. They're not going to pay enough attention, to actually stop us, because they have gotten overconfident, right? Like their whole like recycling prisoners and everything. Like I think that Doctor was an interesting character too. Like, because Kino and Andor, or Keef, were both like, his name is Olaf, and he's like, the patient, he's like, his name is Olaf, and he won't engage with him as a person, because he's just like, the best I can do is either get him back on his feet or put him down, basically, right? And he's like, I don't want to know his name, because like I have to do this every day, right? I'm just constantly either killing people who are either dying or almost dying, or like no longer of service to the Empire, or just getting people back on their feet so that they can serve the Empire. And so I think he's just like trying to just like stay kind of shut down, just like stay in his lane and not make not connect emotionally on too much of a level, because I think he does care also. You know, these are all people.
Yeah, I think very much so. Like, there's such a difference, and again, it's just a few words, but between like, oh, who cares what the guy's name is versus I don't want to know.
Yeah.
Because, again, in that situation, often you'd think the doctor is like, whatever, you're all dead people. I don't care. I'll just do what I can. But he clearly does. And even at the end, when, like, Cassian and Kino are trying to get him to, like, you know, do something else, what he basically, like, what he wants is basically mercy for Olaf. You know, he's like, look, I can, like, stretch him out for another like 10 hours of suffering, or I can just kind of do a mercy, you know, euthanasia right here, which is exactly, I think, probably was the right thing to do. And it's, that guy was on screen for maybe like 5 minutes, and I feel like I know so much about him and like where he's coming from and what he's doing, and just the subtle detail of making it so clear that he's a prisoner. But that the different color stripe like marks him as different, and so he can't really bond with everyone else, and sets it up as though like Cassian and Kino are antagonists to him and vice versa, instead of them all being able to say the system is terrible. Like, it's just so well done. Yeah,
for sure. I feel like that is contrasted by the scene with Bix in the beginning, and then again just like a few seconds later, right? They just like show her for a few seconds just to kind of remind you, she's still there. You know, she's still suffering. Like, this is, you know, like, this is the Empire, right? And this is it. It's funny how in the beginning, like, I think a lot of people were saying like, oh, well, you know, the Empire hasn't really done anything that bad, you know, and rebels are pointing a gun at a kid's head, you know, like they're the same. Like, okay, no. But like, this is, you know, this is what the Empire's been doing this whole time, just to different extents, right? To one extent or another. And, you know, the difference between kind of, this prison feels like very clinical, right? I think it's supposed to, where it's like, they're like, look, you know, we're not here to torture you. We're just here to make you work. And then maybe we'll kill you if it suits us. But it feels like there's not really, I don't know, like malice. Like, there's evil, but not necessarily malice.
Yeah.
Whereas when, you know, the actual overt torturing of Bix, it felt like, I mean, especially that doctor, right? But it felt like there was this malice, you know, that these are these more like true believers. And the fact that what they're using as a means of torture is the evidence of their genocide, you know?
So there's so much I want to talk about there. I want to get into the torture itself, but I want to just start to back up a bit and just talk about it in terms of how they made the movie part, like the movie making part of it. Yes, it's TV, but
filmmaking.
We're talking about this. You and I have talked a number of times, I think at least once or twice on air, definitely a lot off air, about how you know, we don't really love torture porn, and that like a great example is Theon in Game of Thrones. And how in the book a lot of it's off screen, but in the TV show they really like showed you like every horrible thing that happens to him. And I think that's, to me, that's like, yes, it is showing, not telling, but it's basically just like, we're going to put it right in front of you, make you super uncomfortable. Some people love that. Some people find it very effective. I find it doesn't have that effect, especially when compared to something like what they do to Bix, because they tell her in excruciating detail just what they're going to do to her, enough to give us a very visceral sense of how awful it's going to be. And they put the headphones on her, and I braced myself, ready to hear something truly horrible. And then we did, but we don't hear the torture. We just watch Bix's face as she tries to resist. By the way, like, one more person who gets some Emmy nominations. The whole cast is just amazing. But like, we watch her face and we hear her scream, but we never actually experience the torture that she's experiencing. And I feel that it was just so much more effective. And it was like, it didn't feel exploitative or manipulative. It just felt like we want you to be with this character and see the horrors that she's undergoing.
Yeah. Like, it was also very brief, honestly.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't an extended scene. You know, the extended part was the part before the actual torture, right?
Right.
Was kind of like explaining what was going on. And, you know, I do think sometimes the show don't tell is taken too far, you know, and I do think that a lot of times the imagination can come up with something worse than whatever you can put in front of someone's eyes, you know?
Right.
And I mean, it's sort of like an Alien. Like, you don't see the alien very much in Alien, but it's a way scarier movie than Aliens, right? Where you see a bunch of aliens.
Yep.
And so, you know, not showing us or not showing our ears, right? The exact thing, but giving us the feeling of how she feels, you know, and the fact that they've established her as they have Cassian and as they have, you know, a lot of characters as this, she's this very tough person, you know, like she's a badass, and like nonetheless this breaks her, you know. And in the last episode, one of the things that I didn't mention that I in retrospect wanted to was that was the first time that we saw like Andor like shook, you know. And it was after getting literally shocked twice, I think, and just seeing how horrible this place was and how he was supposed to be there for 6 years, you know. And and that kind of reaction from a character means so much more when you've already shown them to be, you know, this like very tough person. It plays different, you know. Not that every character like has to be very tough, and that's the only way that, you know, you can show something is like really traumatic, right? But I think it helps.
Yeah, like the knowing what she has gone through and that it has that effect on her, I think is so much more powerful than any actual hearing.
Right, exactly.
And just the like the delight that you're right, the doctor, but also Dedra, you know, and I mean, and they play it, I think, intentionally in a way to make you uncomfortable because, like, you know, Dedra saying things like, you know, the most dangerous thing you can do is bore me.
Right.
Like, they're well aware that there's a portion of the audience that's going to be like, oh no, mistress, I don't want to bore you. Like, they're going to enjoy that in a level, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all, but that's kind of the thing. Like, they are playing on some of the tropes of, like, look how sexy evil can be, while also being, like, incredibly terrifying and being like, no, this is not someone you should be, like, romanticizing as a girl boss.
Cyril.
You know? Yes, we're going to get to that in a second. But, like, let me just go off on the term girl boss for her, because that's a term that, like, it came up in the early 2010s. And, like, and a lot of the creators on TikTok who I follow, especially a lot of awesome women, have been talking a lot about this in regard to Dedra, that, like, at first the term was like really widely adopted and used and loved. It's like, yeah, like woman power, like, you know, being able to claim yourself and like lean forward thing and like not letting men, you know, talk over you and stuff, all good things. But then a lot of it became really about like, yes, here's the way that you as a woman who is too often shut out of patriarchal oppressive structures in government and corporations and the like can rise to the top and join the boardroom and be just as patriarchal and toxic and oppressive as all the boys. Yeah. And like, I think that they're so intentional that with Dedra that like, yeah, seeing a woman in a male-dominated field makes me like, you go, girl. Like, I want you to succeed. And now I'm seeing her succeeding, and I'm like, oh, my God, no.
Like, wait, nobody should succeed at this. Nobody should succeed at this.
Right? It's just like, oh. I don't just want the whole episode to be like, wow, this show is so good. But it was just, it's taking these tropes and adding so much more nuance to them.
Yeah, I mean, on some level, it's kind of subverting the tropes, right? By kind of taking them and not playing them exactly the way that they're usually played, right? And yeah, I think, you know, it didn't even occur to me that some people might have thought that scene was like, you know, stimulating in that manner. But of course, right? Of course, people, you know.
I mean, I don't know if this was intentional, but I think the writer who wrote that one line, I will guarantee, has seen Willow say, bored now.
I was thinking that when
in
you
a
said
way that just
for me.
drove so many people crazy. But with Willow, it's fun and playful because she's so over the top, and it's like, yeah, that's sexy and awesome and also terrifying. But hey, it's fun to be terrified sometimes. And here it's just like, oh God, no, this is just truly horrible.
Yeah, the writer of these 3 episodes, this arc, is Beau Willimon, who was the I guess creator of the US version of House of Cards.
Oh, that's really
which
cool.
I think has, you know, some of those dynamics, right? Power and you know, sexuality, and
Kevin Spacey is very much like sexy evil,
right? Exactly, and so.
And then his wife even more so, I think. Towards the end.
Yeah. I only really watched the first season, but I know that this writer wrote several of those episodes, which the first season of that I just went through so fast. I was like, just like couldn't stop watching. And yeah, so I think the writing definitely, like, I think there's an awareness of all of these things, right? But like, also like, I don't know, I feel like a certain level of restraint in terms of like, it doesn't feel to me like it's being played for that, right? Like, it feels to me like that is an element of the scene, but that the scene is just, no, this is a useful torture method to them, right? And and Dedra is basically like, she just wants results. It's like that really seems to be all she cares about, right? For whatever reason, whether it's for power and you know, control and glory or whatever, or whether it's because she really is a true believer of the Empire. Like, I don't think that much is clear yet, you know, but I don't doubt that there's like an answer to some extent. I mean, maybe we won't know, right? I think there's a lot of characters where we don't know the whole story, you know, and that's fine. Like, you don't always know everything about everybody, right? I mean, you never know everything about anybody, right? Like, you probably don't even remember everything about yourself, right? Like, this is how minds work. But like, I feel like there's just this really nice blend of kind of a lot of depth that we get shown, but then also some things that remain below the surface that like Kino's character may get revealed in another episode or may not. Yeah.
And I don't need it. Like, I don't want the Kino backstory, you know, show, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and I think you're so right, especially about Dedra, because like, kind of going back to what I was saying, like, often I think when that plays out, like, part of the point is that the Dedra character is actively sadistic, that she's enjoying the pain she is causing others and the fear she's causing others. And then there's so many tropes that go along with that. Like, I've seen that kind of behavior where a part of the audio track is like the very audio click of her high heels, you know, as she's walking around, or that kind of thing. And kind of an evil laugh maybe sometimes. I don't believe Dedra is a sadist.
Right, yeah.
I believe that she has learned that one of the tools that should be in your toolbox to extract information from a particular kind of person is sadism. And that sometimes it's about torturing their body, and sometimes it's about torturing their mind. And she's like, okay, cool. I will take the sadism tool out of the box and use it. Which I think is actually probably a lot more common than, again, the like mwahaha evil laughter, like, you know, true, like, yeah, a lot of people enjoy sadism in their own terms, like, you know, for adult reasons in consensual situations, but that's the whole point. That's what I'm talking about at all. Like, the actual person who's like, mwahaha, I'm going to laugh easily as I torture you, I don't think that happens anywhere near as much as we would see as like from Bond villains, you know? Like, she feels like a much more reasonable one who is like, she's so dedicated to the Empire. And as part of that, the idea of like, oh, I'm torturing another fellow human being or another living soul It can be either A, it's for the greater good of the empire, so it's justified, or B, these people refuse the goodness. They're standing in the way of the greater goodness of the empire, so therefore they've lost all right to be treated humanely. But either way, it is so effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it just feels like it's irrelevant to her, like these people suffering. And the thing that was actually even more on that note was, so before they tortured Bix, they tortured Pac, I think is his name.
Right.
And then the guy who like wanted to have that particular title or whatever in, I think it was it episode 4 or, basically the guy who came and is in charge of the Imperial presence on Ferrix now. I think it's that guy who's like, oh, I would like to hang him. And Dedra's just like, yeah, sure, whatever. I don't care. Like, That's how the Empire operates, and that's how just irrelevant the lives of individual people are to them. And, they're suffering or they're, murdering them. Like, they just don't care. And it's just transactional. It's like, oh, well, we want to remind people who's in charge. And this is like, I think to some extent that's a little different than what we usually have in our world, right? But I think to some extent that's how a lot of people justify, state-sanctioned murder or capital punishment, right? Is, oh, well, the idea is that this will be a deterrence to people and will stop people from committing murder, or in this case, letting someone use a radio,
And like, I've mentioned this before, but I think this is a chance to go into even more detail about it. And spoilers for the novel Lost Star that is about this. But in that novel, which I talked about before, it's about a young woman and man who grow up on the same planet. And one of them winds up joining the rebellion. One of them winds up joining the Empire. And we meet a lot of like young idealist Imperials who all like their childhood was the chaos and horror of the Clone Wars. Right. And so for them, like the Empire comes and like people aren't robbing them all the time. People aren't killing each other all the time. The Empire has made things safe. It made it possible to, have an education and to go see the galaxy instead of just hiding in the caves. They have this dedication to the Empire. And one of the most powerful scenes in the book is them dealing with the Death Star's destruction of Alderaan. And some of them can't take it and wind up trying to leave, or things happen there. But for some of them, it's exactly that. It's it's just the math of it. They look at the fact that like billions of lives were lost during the Clone Wars, and probably even billions more suffered in horrible ways. And I think they established that like the population of Alderaan is maybe like 1 billion or so. It's smaller than Earth, and it's smaller than because that's the idea, is that even though those billion people or 800 million people, whatever it is, had to die, their death will finally convince people to stop fighting the Empire, so we don't have another set of Clone Wars, so we don't have all this chaos and awfulness. And I'm reading this, and one part of you is horrified that any person, any sentient being could ever think like this. But on the other hand, it's a perfect illustration of, the lobster in the pot, and you turn the water on higher and higher. It never notices like how hot, how worse it's getting. We've seen that happen from like the one person who's executed to the group of people being executed to the prisoners being tortured, as we're seeing here, all the way up to I can justify to myself the destruction of an entire planet full of people because I think it'll save even more people in the long run.
Yeah, and we get that in our world too, right? Depressingly so.
Yeah.
Here they just murdered like about 350 people, right? Because they they recycled one prisoner to the wrong place, and then they were like, oh yeah, I didn't get released. I was supposed to get released, and then they're like, oh well, we got to kill all of them, and like,
yep,
the ease with which people can justify things in terms of to me there is like a difference between using state power to do that and doing that within the context of a rebellion. I know not everybody
Very
necessarily sees it that way, but that's to me one of the reasons that I feel like using state power to kill someone, right, in what I call murder, because it's not in an act of like, okay, that there are instances where police will shoot someone and it's like, well, that person literally had a weapon and was attempting to kill someone else with it, and like,
right.
That is the sort of thing where it's like, okay, that's definitely different than all the other instances of police shooting people or of, killing someone in custody. It's like once, right. and I'm not even saying that I necessarily think the first thing is okay, right? I'm just saying that it's different in ways, right? And
yeah, I mean, I think you can say in the first case that, like, in some cases, maybe if the police had better de-escalation training, there would have been another way to solve it. But, like, an imminent threat to other people's lives is, if any time I'm going to justify deadly force, that's closer to where I can justify it. I'm very much.
Yeah, that's the situation where I'm open to having a conversation about what's the best way to handle this situation. One person is actively engaged in violence against another person. What's the third person like? What's your line, right? Like, how do you handle that situation? And that's just categorically different to me than killing someone who's in custody, right? Killing someone who is not presently a threat to anybody. And so I think once you say, okay, I'm okay with the state doing this once for this one person, like, what about 5 people? What about 350 people? What about 800 million people?
Right.
It's just like, well, it's just a number, right? It's the same thing, but it's just a number. And
it's just a number. And the other side of it is if this number is no longer justified, does that mean maybe the smaller number was also not justified? Like, it opens you up to having to wonder, have I been doing all these horrible things all along? It's one of the worst kinds of feeling pot committed. Of like, I started down this road, I can't ever go back.
Right, exactly. And poker theory would tell us there is no point in a hand where you absolutely can't fold anything. But that's a whole different thing. But that's how people think, right? People, I think, have this mentality of like, well, once I've taken, it is too late for me. Like, once I've taken a certain number of steps in a certain direction, there's no turning back. And I mean, obviously there's circumstances where that may be true, right? But I think people often think more circumstances fit those criteria than actually do.
Exactly. I think it's really well said. There's so much with all this that we can get into. I want to make sure we get to cover a bunch of things. So do you mind if I get into the Cyril and Dedra at all?
Yeah.
Because I have some thoughts.
Yeah, why don't you come with that? Because I know Cyril's sort of been your...
This is going to sound like a weird tangent, but I promise it's going to get to a place. And even if you don't care about sports ball, this will make sense, I hope. Matthew Berry, who is a reporter and a columnist and one of the people who really kind of created the genre of media about fantasy football and fantasy sports. He does a column most years to start out the fantasy football like season of like getting ready to play. And for a while, he's used this gimmick where he will say, as a way to kind of like show you how statistics can be taken out of context or a story can be taken out of context, and that there's almost always more nuance. He'll say, let's take player A, and here are player A's stats. And if you look at these stats, it is so clear that player A should be one of the first people you draft. But let's look at player B, because player B has all of these stats. And if you look at this and all these indicators and all these things happening, it should be really clear player B is someone you never want on your team. By the way, player A and player B are the same person. Today, I watched a TV show that said, here is a character, and you're going to watch on screen as an adult man is emotionally and verbally abused by his parent in a way that is going to make you so aware that he has been abused by this parent since he was a little child, and that this grown man who wanted to stop people being killed and find out what had happened has been, faced nothing but corruption and people who didn't believe in him and all of these terrible things, and now we're watching him again be abused by his parent in a way that is making him feel like a child again. And like as he's doing it, he's eating what looks like a childhood cereal and has this very kind of like childlike pose of hiding, almost pulling him into himself. And I'm so sympathetic to that person. And you're also going to show me a character who is so fanatically devoted to his cause, and the cause is the Empire, that he refuses to listen to anybody who is trying to tell him to stop doing what he's doing. He keeps pushing boundaries, he keeps pushing lines, and eventually, when there's one woman who doesn't show any affection or interest in him, but simply is willing to acknowledge that she's concerned about the same things he's concerned about, and he becomes so fixated on her that he declares his love for her and that he can only live, that she's the only reason he can think of living. And like any stalker, because he's a straight up stalker, when she rejects him, he's angry, he physically grabs her, he tries to physically stop her. And then tell me it's the same character. Like, mind utterly blown. And I don't just want to say like great writing, although again it utterly is, and again that actor is so good, because yes, I was rooting for Cyril to some extent. I had a lot of sympathy for him. I knew he was part of some bad things, but we had that great conversation with Danielle from Written in the Star Wars where she was saying that like, yes, all that's true, but he's also very much showing you the path towards like right-wing radicalization and incels and all that, and that's exactly what they showed us. And the fact that they did that while giving us both of those sides of him, the incredibly sympathetic man-child who's been so abused by his mother, and the incel stalker who's doing this horrible thing to another woman who, as we've said, is using sadism to torture people for the Empire. Like, I just putting all that out there it was just so mind-blowing and so well done.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I feel like all those things go together rather smoothly, Yeah. It is. So this fantasy football thing, these are two different sets of stats, right? It's not like one season and another, but it's like, oh, these are certain of their stats, and then these are other stats, and some of them are like very good indicators of ability, and some of them are less good, right? And they just happen to kind of go together.
Right, and it's done in a way where you don't really realize that none of them contradict each other.
Right.
But it's things like, let me tell you about a quarterback who has completed 65% of his passes. And then they'll say like, but let me instead tell you about a quarterback who hasn't thrown a pass over 20 yards in, 2 years or whatever. Like it's.
So here, Cyril,
because you're right,
hasn't thrown a successful pass, but he did make a pass, and slash, fairly hardcore stalking, which I think it's interesting what Dedra's response to that was. Like, she didn't like have him arrested. She could,
right.
She definitely, I think. This scene, it didn't retcon, but it assuaged my issues with the previous week's episode. It's the sort of thing where I felt like it didn't quite feel right that that she was just like, go away, go away, go away. Like, it felt like maybe she could think that she could get some more use out of him. But I think this scene made it clear that I think, number one, she sees him as just being beneath her, right? Like, as basically just being this screw up who, yes, maybe has intentions that are aligned with hers, right? But, he's like, I'm very good at whatever. Like, I found him. And it's like, sure, you found him. But like, then you did, blow everything up. And so I think it makes sense that she really did look down on him. And then also that maybe she did get some of like this vibe, you know, like.
Yeah. Like, she is cold and calculating. He's a fanatic.
Right.
And those are fundamentally different.
Yeah, exactly. And so like maybe they're not actually as aligned. Like they're aligned in motive of like, well, we want the Empire to succeed, but maybe their actual like their why they want the Empire to succeed is different. And I think the same way that like everyone has their own revolution, like maybe everybody has their own empire, right? I mean, there's a lot of overlapping reasons, but like some people are like, yeah, I grew up in the Clone Wars and, you know, things weren't so good. And then, you know, now it's the Empire and maybe things will be better now. And then other people are just like, no, I'm just a hardcore authoritarian. Like that's just how I see things. And then, you know, and then Cyril seems to be very enamored with the concept of power, right? And he, on some level, I think wants to be a sycophant, right? And that seems to fit well with Dedra, who doesn't want to be a sycophant, right? She wants to be the one in control. But again, like, we don't know all of her motives either. And Cyril, I think we didn't have as clear an idea of kind of who he was until this episode, right? It was very revealing. But I think up until this point, they did a good job of letting us wonder. So it didn't feel like none of this felt contradictory. It felt surprising to me. I was like, oh, okay. That's where we're going with that. I was like, okay, I could see that, you know, like it didn't feel wrong.
In some ways, I feel like you actually captured the heart of what I was trying to say with the fantasy football thing even better than I did, which when you said that the whole point is that they fit together smoothly. Because that's kind of Matthew Berry's point often is like, actually, like that we think that if you have all these good statistics, then you must not have all these bad ones. But the truth is most players have like a lot of good and a lot of bad. And with Cyril, I don't think it's good as bad as much as I think it is this, like we tend to think like, oh, if you're a monster, then like you're a total monster. But if you've got a sympathetic backstory, then well, maybe what you're doing is not so bad. And I think Cyril is just this perfect illustration of you can feel, and maybe others don't feel sympathy for him, and I think that's legit too. You know, maybe people are like, why didn't you see this episodes ago? And I think we always did. I think we've been honest about like some of the horrible things he's been doing. Like it's not like we're like rooting for him by any means. But I think it was definitely a like, yeah, this is the thing, is that you can have both sides of these stories, you know, and that they're both there. It's not that it's like you told me this story of like somewhat two totally different characters. It's no, they are the same person, and that there are direct links between what his mother and others have put him through and the way he's now acting towards Dedra. And they explain it, and they help to make. Don't help. They don't. Not the only reason to explain it, but and you can almost make a comparison to Anakin in the same way of like. Anakin had all these terrible things done to him as a kid, and he never had the outlets he needed. It helps to explain the horrible things Anakin did. It does not justify them in any way. And I think part of the power of that also is that like Dedra has been dealing with all these like, you know, sexist men in positions higher than her. Now, this person who's like part of what I think is so effective at that scene is, she does think he's beneath her. She does think he's a nothing. But he's still able to physically intimidate her, at least a little bit. Like, I don't think she's like a wilting flower in the scene by any means, but I think there's definitely a moment of like shock and like upsetness from her when he grabs her. And it was just, I think we need stories like this that can show you that one person can carry all of this and that you can have all these different, you can be very sympathetic and very angry for what they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, people are people and reality is complicated. Right. And everybody has a backstory, you know, and I mean, it, you know, what you were talking about reminds me of like Kingpin in the Daredevil series, you know, where
it's exactly what I was thinking of.
Like he has a backstory. It's a compelling backstory. It's a tragic backstory. Right. He was a victim in his own backstory. And then you could say he was a hero. Right. But also that the moment he became a hero was also the moment he became a villain, you know? And I think just because, like, just because we understand who he is and how he became who he is doesn't mean we have to, offer forgiveness for what harm he's caused, right? Yeah. It just means we have to understand. And I think understanding doesn't always mean like not holding someone accountable for their actions, right? It just means like having an accurate view of the world. I think that some of I don't feel like there's necessarily been like overt sexism in the treatment of Dedra. I think what they've used is they've leveraged the fact that similar situations, like a similar dynamic, generally is predicated on sexism and misogyny, and done that in order to elicit sympathy from the audience, right, and make the character feel relatable, without necessarily sexism or misogyny being the basis of Blevin being so dismissive of her, and the sort of like fighting to have people actually listen to her when she has great ideas for doing horrible things. I
think the word overt is what's really key there, because you're right, it hasn't been overt in the slightest, and I don't think any of the men she's dealing with have ever consciously been like, what's a woman doing in ISB? She doesn't have, we're not going to take her seriously. But the fact that she is the only woman, or at least maybe there's another one, but like one of the only women in a group of mostly men, and they're not taking, like, I think the sexism is definitely there because like they're doing things to have us in the audience project it there. But I think part of the reason we project it there is because unless you're someone who just doesn't want to believe this kind of stuff, we know that it's always there to some extent or another, especially in the kind of patriarchal kind of power structures that are being set up where it is mostly men and things like that. Like, so I think I'm like mostly in agreement with you, but I do think I don't think it's that like, no, everyone here is perfectly gender aware and they just have other reasons for her. I think some level of the fact that she's a woman is a part of it for the characters as well as for the audience, but I think it's much more subtle than we would ever see it. And I think it's true on behalf of the characters. Like if Blevin were to say like, well, but I never really trusted you for a woman, I'd be like, no, that's not the character you've shown us. That doesn't feel right.
Yeah, I'm not fully convinced, but I think that's certainly at least a reasonable interpretation. My kind of counterpoint would be like, I feel like I think his name's Legret, right? The supervisor is like extremely dismissive towards several of the men as well. To me, it feels like that's just like the dynamic. But this episode, we did get some of the first real overt sexism that we've had in the like super overt, with like when Vel shows up and turns out to be Mon Mothma's cousin, and
which is such another good development we need to get into.
Yeah. And like she gives well, let's circle back to that. Because I think the Cyril and Dedra sort of development.
Yeah, there's a couple more things to say.
Yeah, it deserves a little bit more discussion. I feel like what they've done is they've really made these characters feel like real people. They've given us reasons to relate to them or sympathize for them, in terms of like whether the way Dedra's been treated in the beginning is because she's a woman or whatever other reason, regardless, it's relatable, right? It's right. Like, this is a negative experience a lot of people have. This is a way that people, especially women, and I imagine any non, cis male people, right, face this kind of oppression, right, and yet can be part of the oppressing system. And Cyril similarly has had a it seems very much not a happy childhood, and has I did feel in the first time interaction between him and his mom, it felt a little more two-sided, right? Now it does more feel like, yeah, she's his abusive parent, like that doesn't necessarily mean, that their relationship couldn't have been different after he moved out. But like, I definitely see that more the way that you did initially, and I think that's something that, in the first few episodes, I was like, well, I'm not sure sympathetic is really the way I'd refer to him. But it's like, yeah, I do think now there is a little bit more of that, like for me anyway. Right.
Right.
But again, like these are people who want to do evil things.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, and like to me, like that's how to write a great villain. Like there's different ways to write great villains, right? Like you can write the Joker and it's like, yeah, that dude just doesn't have this kind of backstory. Sometimes he does, right? But usually doesn't. Right. And like it's not necessary. It doesn't have to be every villain, right? But this is a great way to write several villains, in fact.
Yeah, and I think the Joker becomes much scarier in a world where most villains do have a relatable backstory.
Exactly.
I don't think the Joker is as effective in most other rogue galleries, except the fact that almost all of the Batman rogue gallery, when the stories are told well, have really legitimate, understandable backstories. And so Heath Ledger just making up, or maybe there's some truth in some of them or none of them, we have no idea, is just so powerful.
For sure.
Last thing I wanted to say on the Cyril part, first of all, it's very much echoing what you're saying, and especially here, I think that we see, like, because there's kind of like, a topic that often gets discussed is about, like, okay, well, if you are this sort of, like, great figure who's doing these great things for, like, people, for hundreds of thousands or millions or billions of people, but you're kind of terrible to like the individual people around you. Like, is that justified or not? And like, again, that so many of like the great heroes of history, some of them actually like terrible people, but some of them people I think like many people still very much look up to and respect, were like terrible to their spouses or their girlfriends or like, their kids or, something like that. And with Cyril that we get both, because we do get that kind of like, yes, we know he is still very much part of wanting to be the Empire. And he has this like stalking moment with Dedra that I know a lot of people felt like not the word triggered gets thrown around a lot, and I want to be much more specific about that word, but had moments of like, oh God, I have had that, and it was a very awful experience and sometimes very much a traumatic experience, and so I immediately feel sympathy I immediately can relate to what Dedra's going through, and that's one more level, because like what he does there is just so over the line. But it also brings me back to something that Danielle in the Star Wars said a couple episodes ago, where she was saying all this, is that, and I think she was pretty clear that she wasn't saying that like everyone like Cyril is going to go down that path, but that he's at a point where he's very recruitable to that kind of path, and like in his case, it is just all on his own, but like Cyril's the kind of guy who I could easily imagine him like finding his way to, incel and like hard right conspiracy theory websites. And it does not mean that all people who've gone through the stuff he does will do that, but it's also like that's why it's so important to intervene early and to help find people early and help them, because it does not at all surprise me. Like it surprised me, like you said, that like we're seeing it so quickly, but like if you show me what you showed about Cyril and then he turns into this person, it makes sense, and I think that's something that a lot of people need to better understand, is that like, that's what can turn into this.
Yeah, I mean, so a few things. One, I've got some issues with like the word and idea incel, but like we don't have to get into that. But I think just to be clear, it's a word that was coined by that community themselves. It is now often used as an insult to people who are not actually officially part of the community, but it was originally used by people like as a self-description. No, I understand. And so I think the fact that it is now used as an insult to people who weren't initially self-describing that way, I think is I don't know. I don't like it. That's fair. I'll just leave it there. But I do think like, we're talking about like Cyril being radicalized, but like also he was already, corporate security, like, I don't think like this corporation functioning under the Empire was like doing good stuff in a good way, you know? Like, they already were, you know, fairly fascistic, I think. And so I think it's more like Cyril being, like, further radicalized, right? Going further down a path that he already had both feet on, you know? But kind of got, like, bounced off of and then doubled down, you know? And I also think that I don't feel that Dedra felt threatened when Cyril grabbed her. Like, because just like, I don't believe that with her. It's possible. It's certainly possible, you know?
Right.
But I do think in the same way that, you know, the work dynamic functions, I do think this does, this is relatable, right? And so like people's reaction to it isn't unreasonable. And I think there is an element of like trying to show what she's going through and have people relate to that while also showing what she's doing. And it's like, you know, I don't know, just like the extent to which you can be a villain and a victim at the same time is like, it's,
I mean, that's kind of the definition of the show in some
right.
ways.
Exactly. I mean, or like you can be a hero and a villain at the same time too, right? Like you were talking about like, there's like a lot of things we don't know about some of the characters, or, you know, like just doubling back to Olaf, like I feel for him, right? I feel sympathy and empathy, and like dude had 41 shifts left, you know, and then he was supposed to be free, and then he has a stroke because they have him working doing things that he shouldn't be doing, right? Not that anybody should be, but like there's a point at which it's like, okay, physically, like you shouldn't be pulling, you know, 7/12s a week, right? Like nobody should, but it's going to be worse for people who are
Cassian's body is much better suited for that work than Olaf,
right. Exactly. But like, we don't know whether Olaf was like caught for like robbing cereal, for like stealing cereal, or is like a serial rapist, or like just was in the wrong place at the wrong time, like Cassian was, who, by the way, actually is technically a serial murderer at this point, right? Even though he got like grabbed for jaywalking, basically, you know, like, and so like for Olaf, like I feel like we can feel sympathy for him without knowing why he's there, right? Maybe he's there unjustly. Maybe, I mean, I don't think that's a place anybody should be, no matter what they've done. But like, you know, there are people who've done things that it's like, you know, as much as I am a prison abolitionist, like I don't know what to do with people who, you know, continually assault people or kill people. Like, I don't know. I don't have that figured out. And like, I do think finding a way to separate them from people who they might kill or assault is good. Right. But,
well, I think that's exactly, and I think that's what makes it so powerful, is because you're right. And I think for a lot of people, they can easily say like, yes, the prison system is bad. But then when it's like this specific person, they're like, no, that's terrible. Like, I know a lot of people who are very against the death penalty, who are so mad that the guy who shot people in a clearly racist attack on a black church in South Carolina is not getting the death penalty. And I think that's part of it's the same thing. It's if you tell me here's a person who did terrible things, then yes, there's a part of me that's going to be like, okay, well, you know, if he gets bad things happen to him, I'm not going to cry about it. But then when we see the bad things happening to a prisoner and we don't know that backstory, we have a very different reaction. And I think intellectually, I think that no matter how awful Olaf's crimes were, still no person should be treated the way he's being treated. That's what I want to intellectually think. But I also know that, like, you know, if you told me about the horrible things that Derek Chauvin was going through right now in jail, he's the cop who killed George Floyd here in Minnesota and was so unrepentant about it. Like, I'm not going to, like, cry a river over it. But I don't think the part of me that like wants to hear about him suffering in jail is good. And I certainly don't think it should be the basis of a criminal justice system. And so, yeah, I think it's, again, this show is making me not only love the Star Wars story so much, but it is challenging me on so many of the things that I think about our own world in ways that I just are. Again, I don't want to keep blindly praising the show, but I think it's one more way that they're taking such an interesting question and turning it on its head. Because you're right, we don't know, and the way it's portrayed feels like a Jean Valjean situation. He stole a loaf of bread, but you're right. He could have been murdering young girls and doing terrible things, or young people of any gender,
or old people,
or just killed his wife, or killed his husband, or old people, whatever it is. To be clear, there, I'm not saying that those crimes are worse. I'm saying that those crimes are ones that we feel to be worse.
Those are ones that generally elicit more of an emotional response from people.
Exactly. So
I'll put it in my droidiest way possible.
There you go. So we're an hour in. We've got at least one major storyline that we want to talk about. And we haven't talked about Cassian Andor in the slightest this episode, except in terms of like how he relates to other people. I think, and he had a very small role in this episode, I think. But let's talk about him a little bit. He is our main character. And I'll start by just telling a quick thing that Danielle, written in the Star Wars on TikTok and Twitter, pointed out, which is that, one of the most emotionally powerful moments in Rogue One is when they've gotten the signal out and he turns to Jyn and says, "Do you think anyone's listening?" And just again, Diego Luna being such a good actor, you can hear like the kind of the hope, but also the like cynical brokenness in him that he's used to the idea that no one's going to listen. And so seeing him talk to Kino in the prison and saying like, they don't care about us, no one's listening. It's just another one of those very subtle, like maybe it's a coincidence, but I really don't think it is. It's just such a good way of helping us better understand his character in a way that lines up so well with who he becomes in Rogue One.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like they've done really well with these kind of references to things that happen, like Nemec saying climb. Like,
right.
If that's something you remember and you make the connection, it's very cool. If it's not, it's still totally functional as a line of dialogue, It doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like they put it in just to be the Easter egg. Right, exactly. Like this whole episode was about nobody's listening and like nobody knows what other people are going through because they're active. They have active disinterest, right? It's like it's different from just like, yeah, I don't know, I don't care. It's like, no, I don't want to know. Let me think about something else. And that's something I struggle with myself. Like I feel like I can only pay attention to events in our world for periods at a time. Yeah. And then if I constantly thought about all the suffering of other humans on this planet, let alone, non-human animals, like I would just constantly be sad and then angry. And like there's always a certain amount of that on some level below the surface, but like I just can't always think about it. Or like I would get nothing done. Going back to a conversation we're having at the beginning of this episode, you just said something that really kind of made something click for me, which is about how the episode's about how nobody is listening. And on the one hand, like I think as viewers, we talked about how it was really powerful and I think made it a lot less unpleasant that we didn't have to hear what Bix was hearing. But once you think about the fact that the whole episode is about no one's listening, what that also means is that the literal last cries of a genocided people who, as you said, it doesn't seem like the Empire has done too many bad things, so clearly no one knows these people were genocided. That's been their last cries have been weaponized by the people who did it, and even we don't get to hear it. Like, oh God, it's so good. It's so much symbolism. Yeah. And like, I think the point though is that like the Empire has genocided a lot of people or displaced a lot of civilizations like the Dani, right, on Aldani, and before them the Republic has done this, right, to the Kenari, or maybe they're called the Kenar and the Kenari is the planet, but like this has been going on for a long time and like nobody's listening. Mon Mothma's talking about it in the Senate. and nobody's listening.
Oh yeah, I forgot that
And-
scene was also. It's the same thing. If she's trying to make the speech,
Yeah.
and it reminds me of how many times I've seen speeches like Bernie or AOC or others giving these impassioned speeches to empty Congress chambers.
Right, exactly. And, you know, the idea of like, what can you do to tell people what's going on if nobody's listening?
Yeah.
And in terms of Andor, like, in terms of Cassian, like this episode, to me, this episode started off, like once we got back to the prison, it started off feeling different than the last episode because it was clear he had a plan.
Yeah.
Right? He was like, I'm getting out of here. And even though there wasn't much progress made, I mean, there was at the end of it, right? I mean, in terms of recruiting, they got the most powerful dude in their little area on board.
Right.
But like this, like the wheels are always spinning, right? Like this is, to me, this is who Andor is.
Yeah.
Is he's someone who's always, you know, we saw in the first few episodes, he's like trying to like spin plates, right? He's like, oh, I'll pay you back. Hold on. I got to borrow this money from this other dude to bring it over to you. And then like, I'm going to go steal this thing and I'll come back. And after I sell it, then I'll give this money and then that'll pay off these people. And like, here he is in the prison and he's already doing that.
Yeah.
You know, he's like the first few shifts or whatever, the first episode we saw him there, he was just like dazed, you know? But then once he was able to get his bearings, like he's always trying to come up with a plan.
Yeah.
And I love that as like that's kind of like, to me, that's sort of like the essence or one aspect of the essence of his character. And so like he doesn't necessarily have to be doing a whole lot for us to understand, you know, that's what he's doing.
Well, especially because, as you said, he had a plan. I'm fairly certain his plan did not involve an entire floor getting executed and one of the people on their team dying of a stroke in a way that made his death seem really horrible to this guy he wanted to recruit. But I think that, like, I don't mean this in a bad way, the way the word is often used. I think Andor is an incredible opportunist. He's very good at, like, and maybe his plan was like, this prison is going to, something horrible enough is going to happen to help people see how bad it is. And I will be ready to take advantage of that when it does. And like, that's just a brilliant kind of planning.
Yeah. He's so like observational, you know? And it's interesting because I think, let's see, Toby Haynes, who directed these 3 episodes, as well as the first 3 episodes of the series, directed one of my favorite episodes of Sherlock, the TV series, which is of course all about observing. Right. The 3rd episode of season 2, the Reichenbach fall, with the whole Moriarty thing and everything. But I feel like, you know, there like. Andor doesn't say that much, right? But like Diego Luna says a lot with his eyes and how he reacts to things, and sometimes reacts to them by like not reacting to them in ways that other people are necessarily going to notice. But like, I feel like we can see what's going on, right? Like he's very kind of closed and like plays things close to the vest for the most part. But then once he sees an angle, he goes for it. And he's not afraid to speak up, but I feel like he only says something when he feels like it's going to have an effect. Yeah. You know, like he wouldn't say all these things, you know, how many guards are there on each level if he didn't think he was maybe going to get an answer. Right. I mean, he keeps pestering him. He's trying to get a reaction. He's trying to get, what's his face on his side. And it's, you know, it's just like, yeah, I feel like we have a very clear idea of who this is and what he's trying to do without him always necessarily having to do a whole lot.
Yeah, I think it's very true. I don't want this episode to go on forever, though we could do like a series of podcasts on just this one episode and certainly this entire show. So let's talk about the one big plot story that we haven't gotten into yet that you started to mention, which is Mon Mothma and like all the things going on with her and Vel and her husband and all that. What are kind of some of your thoughts of like what we learned? You're starting to go into it before and said let's put a pin on it. So let's take out that pin and go into it deeper.
Right. And Kino was the name that I couldn't come up with.
That's
so, so Vel shows up and turns out to be Mon's cousin, which is the sort of thing that if it were totally random, I think would feel like a little bit weird.
Like the universe is too small kind of a moment that a lot of shows give you.
Exactly. But it's also revealed that, Vel met, Vel knows Luthen, right? Because her and Mon are cousins, and so they all know each other, right? And so that's kind of how Vel ended up getting, her assignment, basically, where, Mon's like, what does he have you doing? She's like, what does who have me doing?
Right.
Who are you talking about? He doesn't exist. We don't talk about him, right? But yeah, her being, being the cousin felt like a logical connection. It didn't feel like, it wasn't coincidence, right? There's an explanation. And, there was some foreshadowing of that when Cinta talked about her being like a disillusioned rich girl, basically, right? And so in terms of the like overt sexism that we see now, and heteronormativity, we see, she gives this dress, which seems like a nice dress to me, to Mon's daughter. And Mon is like, oh, we'll see what your father has to say about that. And then the daughter is like, oh, dad lets me do whatever I want.
Right.
And so like, I don't know, this sort of like, oh, that dress like too short or too adult or whatever to you is like, it's interesting how like Mon Mothma's maybe internalized some of this. What I would say does seem like misogyny to me, or sexism at least. But also in a way that she's controlling her daughter and not letting her do what she wants. She's not giving her daughter freedom, and her daughter's like, oh, but dad, Perrin, will give me freedom. Even though he's on the side, he's aligned with, or seems more aligned with this like oppressive regime.
See, right? This is so fascinating because I had the exact opposite reading of the scene, and I think both are true and both show sexism, which is that what I took is that often in parental situations, like one of the things that I often hear in terms of people talking about like the way parental roles are divided up and the sexism involved is that dad gets to be like, let's go have ice cream, and mom is like, you have to eat your green vegetables. And that's so mom. Right. And so to me, that's what I heard when it's like the dad lets me do anything. It's these sort of like, dad gets to be fun and permissive and thus get to be the one the kid seems to like more because dad knows mom is going to do the discipline. Mom is going to be the one to say like, and absolutely, I think Peril would be the one to kind of be like, whatever. I know Mon won't actually let you wear that, or Mon won't actually let you stay out to 4 a.m. So why would I bother being the bad parent? When I can just be the one everyone likes. And I don't think that negates any of the stuff you were saying either. I think both of them are so true.
Yeah, for sure.
And I also appreciate what you pointed out about heteronormativity. And again, it's so subtle. Like but to me, it's just like one more like. Vel and Sintra being in a gay relationship is becoming a very important plot point, even though it's never been stated or in any really overt way. People who know what to look for would say it's very overt, but not in a like, no one's protesting like, oh my God, there's more gay people in Star Wars. And so here's just one comment about like, why you need to be married, especially at your age. And the look that Mon and Vel share, because Mon clearly knows and doesn't make the dumb assumptions Perrin does. It was just that one quick moment said so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we had a touch of ageism thrown in too, right? Like, oh, especially at your age, right. And but yeah, it's. And also, it's like, it's unclear how much Perrin knows, right? Because it feels like the relationship between Vel and Cinta may be, covert, since, they're engaged in covert operations, right? On the regular, or at least in that instance.
I doubt Perrin has ever met Cintra.
Right, yeah. Although he does look like someone who was in Sintra.
Oh, that's fair. Cinta. Her name is Cinta. I keep going
Cinta,
Cinta.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, like really, was this dude in The Witcher? He's got a Witcher face.
He really does. I mean,
right?
Well, the faces of Witchers are
was in
changing these
Dracula.
days, but yes, I know what you mean.
Oh, I don't know. Oh, is there? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't keep up with these things. But yeah, it just. Yeah, I don't think he's met her, but I mean, I don't know how much he knows about Vel, like, you know, and, you know, her orientation, right? And whether he's making wrong assumptions or whether he's being more overtly bigoted,
right?
You know what I mean? Either way, you know, not good. Yeah. But I mean, we already don't like him.
Right.
He's so, yeah.
And I think that kind of goes what you're saying before. We don't need to know. You know, we don't need to know.
Right.
Like, my headcanon would be that Mon has probably never met Cinta either. Like that's
sure.
And it just tells us so much. And it, to me, the other part of all that's so interesting was it's one more layer of how different Mon and you know, Mon and Luthen obviously have different, like you've got Mon, you've got Luthen, you've got Vel, and you've got Saw Gerrera. And all four of them have very different positions as to what is okay, what is not okay, what is advisable, what is not. Like they all want to bring down the Empire, but they're at four fundamentally different places.
Yeah, for sure. And like that makes sense, right? Yeah. Because they don't necessarily all want the same thing after they bring down the Empire.
Right.
Right. And I mean, kind of sadly to me, but like I know other people will view it differently. Like we have an idea of what the New Republic ends up looking like. And like it doesn't look too good. Mm-hmm. You know, they're still murdering people. Right. I remember when I think was it episode 5 of Mandalorian where they just like casually dropped that in.
Oh, yeah. That the people were being executed.
Yeah. And you know, like, yeah, it doesn't seem like the New Republic suddenly is this, you know, enlightened, wonderful state, right? And I think you can see how I want to call it the New Order, the First Order.
The First Order, yeah.
Yeah. It feels like very much not the First Order, though. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, that feels like that name's a little, like you're like the Eighth Order, right?
I think the history is something more along the lines of like that the first order of every society should be like respect for the power at the center of it. Like that's supposed to more be about like a return to authoritarianism.
Right. But yeah, like it seems like, you know, regardless of what the New Republic actually ends up being, you know, we have people here who like Mon Mothma seems to think that she can still do good in the Senate.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like I do feel like she is mentally and emotionally sort of between.
Yeah.
Right. Between thinking, well, maybe we'll just do some things, but like maybe politics will work it out. You know, maybe we will work it out through politics. Who knows? Like, let's keep trying.
I think she said something to Luthen when he was being very cynical, where she was like, okay, yeah, maybe on some level, I know that like the Senate isn't going to do anything, but at least me going through the motions helps protect my cover. But then you saw her in this episode, like, and you saw her give that speech, and like both during the speech and as she gets into the car afterwards, which happily we didn't see the car fully lift off, which that's a win.
Yeah. It's a win.
It is so clear that she's disappointed. And like, I get that feeling of like one part of you doesn't actually expect any good to happen, but another part of you is still very disappointed when it doesn't.
Yeah, she still has hope there, right? In terms of, you know, it's another 5 years before the Senate is going to be disbanded, and I don't know exactly. I'm trying to remember whether there was a Rebels episode or something that makes it clear how long she's in the Senate, but like basically, you know, she's gonna be there, part of this horrible power structure, trying to change it from the inside, but also understanding that like maybe probably that's not going to work, and so she's going to be part of this other thing too. Right. But it feels like her cover is more than just her cover,
right?
You know, and it's like the extent to which it's purely a cover and the extent to which it's actually part of her ambition is unclear, you know, and I think it's unclear to her.
Yeah.
I think she's figuring that out, right? And as the rebellion is boiling up, as it's going from like a simmer to a boil, I think she has to confront that herself in terms of what she thinks. And then meanwhile, Saw, we only get a little bit of Saw, right? We just had that one conversation. We know where he ends up in Rogue One. And, we see him in some other media here and there as well. But like, he very clearly is like, yeah, we can't just like turn things back and then everything's going to be fine. Yeah. Right. I mean, he thought things were horrible before. Because things were horrible before, yeah. Right? It doesn't necessarily mean his methods are better or the best way to go about things, but I think he does have, you could say he's very cynical, but or maybe he's an idealist. I'm not sure.
I mean, to me, two of the characters who are the most alike are Saw Gerrera and Chan Syndulla, the father of Hera, because he's another one who I think is just like
from Rebels.
He doesn't care about the galactic stuff. He's like, the Separatists came to my planet, and so I want to kick out the Separatists from my planet. And if you Republic people want to like help me do that, sure. But I don't want to be in your Republic. I don't want to be in your Empire. Right. I don't want to be in your Separatist alliance. I just want my planet to like do its own thing. And it's a very and that's fundamentally different from what Mon does, because Mon fundamentally still believes that a single galactic government is a good thing, and that she wants it to be more civil rightsy, and maybe individual planets have a lot more rights and stuff like that, but she still is committed to that idea. And like, it's one more way in which the prequels are so frustrating to me, because I think the idea of should every planet in a galaxy all be part of one centralized government, or should they all have much more like diverse, power throughout them? That's a really interesting question with a lot of good sides to both questions. And we didn't get it in prequels, but we're starting to get more of it here.
Yeah, for sure. And like in the prequels, we got a good reason.
Right.
We got a good argument for no, they should all be part of something to some extent.
Right.
Like, Tatooine wasn't so much part of that, right? It was, and like they had slavery.
Yeah.
So like, I think you should at least have some sort of a, something that's like, yeah, you can't do
Galactic
that.
Anti-Slavery Patrol. Yeah.
Exactly. Like if you're going to do one thing,
yeah, do
that. And then like, also like, you can't have any of these local genocides either. We're nixing that. And like those two things, if you're just like, okay, no slavery, no genocide, you could figure out your traffic laws and whatever.
I like it.
There's
a whole, at some point, I think I want to do a discussion about what comes after Return of the Jedi, because I think there are so many interesting questions about, because in some ways, I think I'm not as convinced that the New Republic was actively bad as much as it just was chaotic. And there's so much good historical evidence about like when like messy democracy takes over directly from authoritarianism is almost always a disaster. But let's put that aside, because we're now in 90 minutes.
I'll just co-sign like, we don't know.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah. We know it. There are at least some problems, but we don't know that much about it.
Is there any other last stuff you want to say, though, about Mon and Val and Perrin, or just any of the episode in general?
No. I think I'm good. It was great.
Yeah.
Give me a prison break next time, and we're good.
Yeah. I mean, once again, I hear what you were saying about, because the episode was very. Saying something is slow or fast feels weird to me, because I don't think it's bad if it's slow, but you can't just be killing time. You have to be using that time very efficiently. Like, it's easy to catch my attention with a space battle or a lightsaber battle or like people being chased through a city and shooting at each other.
But it's easy to lose it too. Yeah. Right? I mean, if a scene like that goes on too long, something can feel slow because you're not interested.
Right. But like just for the first 30 seconds, you're going to grab me even if it's not the best. Whereas like, or like if you have those every now and then, the dialogue is going to get broken up a little. I am all for all dialogue all the time, but it has to really be top quality. And I think that's what, kind of echoing what you were saying, and maybe I'm misstating it, but like of the idea of like, if it was, to me, this episode's like playing a violin. Like, no one has ever been decent at the violin. because anything less than very good sounds god awful. And I think that's what this like. I think trying to do an episode like this that is so just talky and character development and slow evolving of the plot, it has to be done very well or else it's going to really fold. And this was like, to me, this is becoming the Wire level TV of like, I'm not always the fan of like, let me choose the 5 best and not, but this is, I don't know how it's going to end and we'll see. But I think going forward, this is going to be on my list of just like overall best TV shows.
Yeah. What I said exactly was if this episode weren't brilliant, it would have been unwatchable.
Yeah.
And it was brilliant. And I think the whole series so far has been brilliant. You know, I've had really only a few small quibbles, really. And some of those have kind of shaken out as we've gotten more information. And yeah, I don't know how it's going to end. But I do just think I haven't seen something better. Yeah. You know, it's tied for the best so far with me, with like Daredevil, with like The Wire, with, The Last Airbender. Yeah. Like, I could probably come up with some other ones that I feel are just pitch perfect versions of what they are. And then even then, always there's like, season 5 of The Wire wasn't as good as season 2 or 4. Yeah. But like, I mean, within within the highest levels of anything, there's always going to be some variation and some preference. But
for sure.
Yeah. All I can come back to is like, how many episodes are there in each season of Andor?
Yeah.
Never more than 12?
Never more than 12. I want so many more.
Never more than 12.
All right. Well, Paul, I know you are basically spending the month of November secluding yourself and focusing on some other stuff. So I think it's fair to say that Zen Madman won't be producing too much, but definitely I would suggest people kind of keep checking out Zen Madman. And I greatly appreciate that one of the few things you're kind of popping your head out for is to do these episodes. So thank you.
Literally the only thing.
Well, awesome. So fans, that is awesome. Thank you so much. We have some great feedback that's been building up. I keep thinking we'll keep the discussion to about an hour and then do the feedback. We just don't have time for that. I'm not even going to put in a stinger today because it's gone so long. But I think we'll just do, probably in early December, just a full-on feedback episode. So please keep those things coming. In part, it's also because the 3 great feedbacks I've gotten have all been like multiple paragraphs long. So send a 2-sentence tweet and you're a lot more likely to be read up on the air sooner, but I will get to all those long emails because you've made great points, and thank you so much for being fans and continue to write into those things. So thank you, Paul. Thank you all of you for listening. As always, we are the Ethical Panda Productions, so theethicalpanda.com. You find all my podcasts, all the ways to contact us. Send us more feedback. Let us know what you think. Where are you on any of these characters? Let us know. All that and more. And thank you so much for listening in. And remember, you're all fighting your own revolution. Or rebellion. Or whatever the hell the line is. But don't get the line wrong.
Never more than 12.
Never more than 12.